Chapter 2. You are not your mind. The greatest obstacle to enlightenment. Enlightenment? What is that? A beggar had been sitting by the side of a road for over 30 years. One day, a stranger walked by. "Spare some change?" mumbled the beggar, mechanically holding out his old baseball cap. "I've nothing to give you," said the stranger. Then he asked, "What's that you are sitting on?" "Nothing," replied the beggar. "Just an old box. I've been sitting on it for as long as I can remember." "Ever looked inside?" asked the stranger. "No," said the beggar. "What's the point? There's nothing in there." "Have a look inside," insisted the stranger. The beggar managed to pry open the lid. With astonishment, disbelief, and elation, he saw the box was filled with the gold. "I am that stranger who has nothing to give you, and who is telling you to look inside, not inside any box, as in parable, but somewhere even closer, inside yourself." "But I am not the beggar," I can hear you say. "Those who have not found their true wealth, which is the radiant joy of being and the deep, unshakable peace that comes within it, are beggar, even if they have great material wealth. They are looking outside for scrap. They are looking outside for scrap of pleasure or fulfillment, for validation, security, or love, while they have a treasure within that not only includes all those things but it is infinitely greater than anything the world can offer." The word enlightenment conjures up the idea of some superhuman accomplishment, and the ego likes to keep it that way. But it is simply your natural state of felt oneness with being. It is a state of connectedness with something immeasurable and indestructible, something that almost paradoxically is essentially you and yet is much greater than you. It is finding your true nature beyond name and form. The inability to feel this connectedness gives rise to the illusion of something from yourself and your world around you. You then perceive yourself, consciously or unconsciously, as an isolated fragment. Fear rises, and the conflict within and without becomes norm. I love the Buddha's simple definition of enlightenment as the end of suffering. There is nothing superhuman is that, is there? Of course, as a definition, it is incomplete. It tells only you what enlightenment is not, no suffering, but what's left when there is more suffering. The Buddha is silent on that, and his silent implies that you will have to find out for yourself. He uses a negative definition so that mind cannot make it into the something to believe in or into a superhuman accomplishment, a goal that is impossible for you to attain. Despite this precaution, the majority of the Buddhists still believe that enlightenment is for the Buddha, not for them, at least not in this lifetime. You use the word being. Can you explain it? What do you mean by that? Being is the eternal, ever present one life beyond the myriad forms of the life that are subject to birth and death. However, being is not only beyond but also deep within every form as its innermost invisible and indestructible essence. This means that is accessible to you now as your own deepest self, your true nature. But don't seek to grasp it with your mind. Don't try to understand it. can know it only when the mind is still, when you are present, when your attention is fully and intensely in the now. Being can be felt, but can never be understood mentally. To regain awareness of the being and to abide in that state of feeling realization is enlightenment. When you say being, are you talking about God? If you are, then why don't you say it? The word God has become empty of meaning through thousands of years of misuse. I use it sometimes, but I do sparingly. By misuse means that people who have never even glimpsed the realm of sacred, the infinite vastness behind the word, use it with great conviction as if they knew what they are talking about, or they argue against it as if they knew what it is that they are denying. This means this misuse gives rise to the absurd belief, assertion, and egoic delusion such as my or our God is only true God and your God is false, or Nietzsche's famous statement, God is dead. The word God has become a closed concept. The moment the word is uttered, a mental image is created, no longer, perhaps, of an old man with a white beard, but is still a mental representation of someone or something outside you. And yes, almost inevitably a male someone or something. Neither God or being nor any other God can define or explain the ineffable reality behind the words. So the only important question is whether the word is a help or hindrance in enabling you to experience that toward which is point. Does it point beyond itself to that transcendent reality, or does it lend itself too easily to become no more than an idea in your head that you believe in a mental idol? The word being explains nothing, but nor does God. Being, however, has the advantage that it is an open concept. It does not reduce the infinite invisible to a finite entity. It is impossible to form a mental image of it. Nobody can claim exclusive possession of being. It is your very essence, and it is immediately accessible to you as the feeling of your own presence, the realization I am that is I am that is prior to I am this or I am that. So it is only a small step from the word being to experience of being. What is the greatest obstacle to experiencing this reality? Identification with your mind, which causes thoughts to become compulsive. Not to be able to stop thinking is a dreadful affliction, but we don't realize this because almost everybody is suffering from it, so it is considered as normal. This insistent mental noise prevents you from finding that realm of inner stillness that is inseparable from being. It also creates a false mind made self that casts a shadow of fear and suffering. We'll look at all that in more detail later. The philosopher Descartes believed that he had found the most fundamental truth when he made his famous statement, I think, therefore I am. He had, in fact, given expression to the most basic error, to equate thinking with being and identify with thinking. The compulsive thinker, which means almost everyone, lives in a state of apparent separateness in an insanely complex world of continuous problem and conflict. a word that reflects the ever increasing fragmentation of the mind. Enlightenment is a state of wholeness, of being at one and therefore at peace, at one with life in its manifested aspect, the world, as well as with your deepest self and life unmanifested, at one with being. Enlightenment is not only the end of suffering and of continuous conflict within and without, but also end of the dreadful enslavement to incessant thinking. What an incredible liberation is this! Identification with your mind creates an opaque screen of concept, labels, images, words, judgments, and definition that blocks all true relationship. It comes between you and yourself, between you and your fellow man and woman, between you and nature, between you and God. It is the screen of thought that creates the illusion of separateness, the illusion that there is you and a totally separate other. You then forget essential fact that underneath the level of physical appearances and separate forms, you are you are one with all that is. By forget, I means that you can no longer feel this oneness as self-evident reality. You may believe it to be true, but you no longer know it to be true. A belief may be comforting only through your own experience, however, does it become liberating. Thinking has become a disease. Disease happens when things get out of balance. For example, there is nothing wrong with the cells dividing and multiplying in the body, but when the process continues in disregard of the total organism, cells proliferate and we have disease. Note: the mind is a superb instrument if used rightly. Used wrongly, however, it becomes very destructive. To put it more accurately, it is not so much that you use your mind wrongly, you usually don't use it at all. To put it more accurately, it is not so much that you use mind wrongly, you usually don't use it at all. It uses you. This is the disease. You believe that you are the mind. This is the delusion. The instrument has taken you over. I don't quite agree. It is true that I do a lot of aimless thinking, like most of the people, but I can't still choose to use my mind to get and accomplish things, and I do that all the time. Just because you can solve a crossword puzzle or build an atom bomb doesn't mean that you use your mind. Just as a dog loves to chew bones, the mind loves to get its into the problem. That's why it does crossword puzzles and builds the atom bombs. You have no interest in either. Let me ask you this: can you be free of your mind whenever you want to? Have you found the off button? You mean stop thinking altogether? No, I can't, except maybe for a moment or two. Then the mind is using you. You're consciously identified with it, unconsciously identified with it. So you don't even know that you are its slave. It's almost as if you were possessed without thinking, and so you take a possessing entity to be yourself. The beginning of freedom in realization that you are not the possessing entity, the thinker. Knowing this enables you to observe the entity The moment you start watching the thinker, a high level of the consciousness becomes activated. You then begin to realize that there is a vast realm of intelligence behind thought. That thought is only a tiny aspect of that intelligence. You also realize that all the things that truly matter, beauty, love, creativity, joy, inner peace, arises beyond the mind. You begin to awaken, freeing yourself from your mind. What exactly do you mean watching the thinker? When someone goes to the doctor and says, I can hear a voice in my head, he or she will most likely to be sent to a psychiatrist. The fact is that in a very similar way, virtually everyone hears a voice or several voices in their head all the time. The involuntary thought process that you don't realize you have the power to stop. Continuous monologues or dialogues. You have probably come across mad people in the street incessantly talking or muttering to themselves. Well, that's not much different from what you and all other normal people do, except that you don't do it out loud. You don't do it out loud. The voice comments, speculates, judges, compares, complains, likes, dislikes, and so on. The voice is not necessarily relevant to the situation you find yourself in at the time. It may be reviving the recent or distant past, or rehearsing or imagining possible future situation. Here it often imagines things going wrong and negative outcomes. It is called worry. Sometimes the soundtrack is accompanied by visual images or mental movies. Even if the voice is relevant to the situation at hand, it will interpret it in terms of the past. This is because of the voice belongs to your conditioned mind, which is the result of all your past history as well as of the collective cultural mindset you inherited. So you see and judge the present through the eyes of the past and get totally distorted view of it. It is not uncommon for the voice to be a person's one worst enemy. Many people live with a tormentor in their head that continuously attacks and punishes them and drains them of a vital energy. It is the outcome of untold misery and unhappiness as well as of disease. The good news is that you can free from yourself, from your mind. This is the only true liberation. You can take the first step right now. Start listening to the voice in your head as often as you can. Pay particular attention to any repetitive thought patterns, those old gramophone records that have been playing in your head perhaps for many years. This is what I mean by watching the thinker, which is another way of saying listen to the voice in your head, be there as the witnessing presence. When you listen to that voice, listen to it impartially. That is to say, do not judge. Do not judge or condemn what you hear, but doing so would mean that same voice has come in again through the back door. You will soon realize there is a voice, and here I am listening to it, watching it. This I am realization. This sense of your own presence is not a thought. It arises from beyond the mind. So you listen to a thought. You are aware not only of the thoughts but also of yourself as witness of thought. A new dimension of consciousness has come in. As you listen to it, you feel a conscious presence, your deeper self, behind or underneath the thought, as it were. The thought then loses its power over you, and quickly subsides, because you are no longer energizing the mind through the identification with it. This beginning of end of the involuntary and compulsive thinking. When thoughts subside, you experience a discontinuity in the mental stream, a gap of no mind. At first, the gaps will be short, a few seconds perhaps, but gradually they will become longer. When these gaps occurs, you will feel a certain stillness at peace inside you. This is the beginning of your natural state of felt oneness with being, which is usually obscured by mind. With practice, the sense of stillness and peace will deepen. In fact, there is no end to depth. You'll also feel a subtle emanation of joy arising from deep within, the joy of being. It is not a trance-like state, not at all. There is no loss of consciousness here. The opposite in case, if you, if the price of the peace were a lower, if the price of peace were a lowering your consciousness, and the price of stillness, a lack of vitality and alertness, then they would not be worth having. In this state of interconnectedness, you are much more alert, more awake than in the mind identified state. You are fully present. It also raises the vibrational frequency of the energy field that gives life to a physical body. As you go more deeply into the realm of no mind, as it's sometimes called in the East, you realize the state of the pure consciousness. In that state, you feel your own presence with such intensity and such joy that all thinking, all emotions, your physical body, as well as the whole external world become relatively insignificant in comparison to it. And yet, this is not a selfish, but the selfless state. It takes you beyond what you previously thought of as yourself. That presence is essentially you and at the same time inconceivably greater than you. What I'm trying to convey here may sound paradoxical or even contradictory, but there is no other way that I can express it. Instead of watching the thinker, you can also create a gap in the mind stream simply by directing the focus of your attention into the now. Just become intensely conscious of the present moment. This is a deeply satisfying thing to do. In this way, you draw consciousness away from mind activity and create a gap of no mind in which you are highly alert and aware but not thinking. This is the essence of meditation. In your life of every day, you can practice this by taking any routine activity that normally is only a means to an end and giving it your fullest attention so that it becomes an end in itself. For example, the every time you can walk up and down the stairs in your house or the place of work, pay close attention to every steps, every moment, even your breathing. Be totally present. Or when you wash your hands, pay attention to all your senses perception associated with the activity, the sound and feel of the water, the movement of your hands, the scent of the soap, and so on. Or when you get into your car after you close the door, pause for a few seconds and observe the flow of your breath, become aware of silent but powerful sense of presence. There is one certain criterion by which you can measure your success in this practice, the degree of peace that you can feel within. So, the single most vital steps on your journey toward enlightenment is this: learn to disidentify from your mind. Every time you create a gap in the stream of mind, the light of your consciousness grows stronger. One day you may catch yourself smiling at the voice in your head as you would smile at the antics of the child. This means that you no longer take the content of your mind all that seriously, as your senses of self does not depend on it. Enlightenment, rising above the thought, isn't thinking essential in order to survive in this world? Your mind is an instrument, a tool. It is there to be used for a specific task, and when the task is completed, you lay it down. As it is, I would say about 80 to 90% of most of the people thinking is not only repetitive and useless, but because of its dysfunctional and often negative nature, much of it is also harmful. Observe your mind, and you will find this to be true. It causes a serious leakage of vital energy. This kind of compulsive thinking is actually an addiction. What characterizes an addiction? Quite simply, this: you no longer feel that you have the choice to stop it. It seems stronger than you. It also gives you a false sense of pleasure that invariably turns into the pain. Why should we be addicted to thinking? Because you are identified with it, which means that you derive your sense of self from the content and activity of your mind. Because you believe that you would cease to be if you stop thinking. As you grow up, you form a mental image of who you are based on your emotional and cultural conditioning. We may call this phantom of self the ego. It consists of mind activity and can only be kept going through constant thinking. The term ego means different things to different people, but when I use it here, it means a false self created by unconscious identification with mind. To the ego, the present moment hardly exists. Only past and future are considered important. The vital, the total reversal of truth accounts for the fact that in the ego mode, the mind is so dysfunctional. It is always concerned with keeping the past alive because without it, who are you? It constantly projects itself into the future to ensure its continued survival and to seek some kind of release or fulfillment there. It says, one day when this, that, or the other happens again, one day when this, that, or other happens, I'm going to be okay, happy, at peace. Even when the ego seems to be concerned with the present, it is not the present that it sees. It misperceives it completely because it looks at it through the eyes of the past, or it reduces the present to means to an end that always lies in the mind projected future. Observe your mind, and you will see that this is how it works. The present moment holds the key to liberation, but you cannot find the present moment as long as you are your mind. I don't want to lose my ability to analyze and discriminate. I wouldn't mind learning to think more clearly in a more focused way, but I don't want to lose my mind. The gift of thought is most precious thing we have. Without it, we'd just be another species of animal. The predominance of mind is no more than a stage in evolution of consciousness. We need to go on to the next stage now as a matter of urgency. Otherwise, we will be destroyed by the mind, which has grown into the monster. I will talk about this in more detail later. Thinking and consciousness are not synonymous. Thinking is only a small aspect of consciousness. Thought cannot exist without consciousness, but consciousness does not need thought. Enlightenment means rising above thoughts, not falling back to level below the thought, the level of animal or a plant. In the enlightenment state, you still use your thinking mind when needed, but in a much focused and effective way than before. You use it mostly for practical purpose, but you are free of the involuntary internal dialogue and there is inner stillness. When you do use your mind, and particularly when a creative solution is needed, you oscillate every few minutes or so between thoughts and stillness, between mind and no mind. No mind is consciousness without thought. Only in that way it is possible to think creatively, because only in that way does thought have any real power. Thought alone, when it is no longer connected with the much vaster realm of consciousness, quickly becomes barren, insane, and destructive. The mind is essentially a survival machine, attack and defense against other mind, gathering, storing, and analyzing information. This is what it is good at, but it is not at all creative. All true artists, whether they know it or not, create a form of place of no mind from inner stillness. The mind then gives from the mind then gives form to creative impulse or insight. Even the great scientists have reported that their creative breakthrough came out at a time of mental quietude. The surprising result of nationwide inquiry among America's most eminent mathematics, including Einstein, to find out their working methods, was that thinking plays only a subordinate part in the brief, decisive phase of creative act itself. So, I would say that simple reason why the majority of scientists are not creative is not because they don't know how to think, but because they don't know how to stop thinking. It wasn't through the mind, through thinking, that the miracle, that is, life on earth or your body, were created and are being sustained. There is clearly an intelligence at work is far greater than the mind. How can a single human cell measuring 1 by 1000 parts of an inch across contains instruction with its DNA that would fill 1000 book of 600 pages of each? The more we learn about the workings of the body, the more we realize just how vast is the intelligence at work within it and how little we know. When the mind reconnects with that, it becomes a most wonderful tool. It then solves something greater than itself. Emotion, the body's reaction to your mind. What about emotions? I get cast I get caught up in my emotions more than I do in my mind. Mind, in the way I use the word, is just a thought. It's not just a thought. It includes your emotion as well as all unconscious mental emotional reactive patterns. Emotion arises at the place where mind and body meet. It is the body's reaction to your mind, or you might say, a reflection of your mind in the body. For example, an attack through a hostile an attack thought or a hostile thought will create a body buildup of energy in the body that we call anger. The body is getting ready to fight. Body is getting ready to fight. The thought that you can the thought that you are being threatened physically or psychologically causes the body to contract. And this is the physical side of what we call fear. Research has shown that strong emotions even cause changes in the biochemistry of the body. This biochemical changes represents the physical or material aspect of the emotions. Of course, you are not usually conscious of all your thought patterns, and it is often only through watching your emotions that you can bring them into the awareness. The more you are identified with your thinking, your likes and dislikes, judgments and interpretation, which is to say, the less present you are as the watching consciousness, the stronger the emotional energy charge will be, whether you are aware of it or not. If you cannot feel your emotions, you are cut off from them. You will eventually experience them on a purely physical level as a physical problem or symptom. A great deal has been written about this in recent years, so we don't need to go to it here. Oh, so we don't need to go into it here. A strong unconsciousness emotional pattern may even manifest as an external event that appears to just happen to you. For example, I have observed that people who carry a lot of anger inside without being aware of it and without expressing it are more likely to be attacked verbally or even physically by other angry people, and often for no apparent reason. They have a strong emanation of anger that certain people pick up subliminally, and that triggers their own latent anger. If you have difficulty feeling your emotions, start by focusing attention on your inner body energy field of the body. If you have difficulty feeling your emotion, start focusing attention on the inner energy field of your body. Feel the body from within. This will also put you in touch with the emotions. We will explore this in more detail later. You say that an emotion is the mind's reflection in the body, but sometimes there is a conflict between the two. The mind says no, while the emotion says yes, or the other way around. If you really want to know your mind, the body will always give you a truthful reflection. So look at the emotion or rather feel it in your body. If there is an apparent conflict between them, the thought will be the lie, the emotion will be the truth. Not the ultimate truth of who you are, but the relative truth of your state of mind at that time. Conflict between surface thoughts and unconsciousness mental processes is certainly common. You may not yet be able to bring your unconsciousness mind activity
into awareness as thoughts, but it will always be reflected in the bodies as an emotion, and of this you can become aware. To watch an emotion in this way is basically the same as listening to or watching a thought, which I described earlier. The only difference is that while a thought is in your head, an emotion has a strong physical component and so is primarily felt in the body. You can then allow the emotions to be there without being controlled by it. You no longer are emotion. You are the watcher, the observer, the observing the presence. If you practice this, all that is unconsciousness in you will be brought into the light of consciousness. So, observing our emotion is as important as observing our thoughts? Yes, make it a habit to ask yourself, what's going on inside me at this moment? That question will point you in in the right direction. But don't analyze, just watch. Focus your attention within. Feel the energy of the emotion. If there is no emotion present, take your attention more deeply into the inner energy field of your body. It is the doorway into the being.
An emotion usually represents an amplified and energized thought patterns, and because of it often overpowering energetic charge. It is not easy initially to stay present enough to be able to watch it. It wants to take you over, and it usually succeeds unless there is enough presence in you. If you are pulled into unconsciousness, identification, unconscious identification with the emotions through lack of presence, which is normal, the emotion temporarily becomes you. Often, a vicious circle builds up between your thinking and the emotion. They feed each other. The thought patterns create a magnified reflection of itself in the form of an emotion, and the vibrational frequency of the emotion keeps feeding the original thought patterns. By dwelling mentally on the situation, event, or a person that is perceived cause of the emotion, the thought feeds energy to the emotion, which in turn energizes the thought patterns, and so on. Basically, all emotions are modification of the primordial differentiated emotions that has its origin in the loss of awareness of who you are beyond the name and form. Because of its own differentiated nature, it is hard to find the name that precisely describes this emotion. Fear comes close, but apart from a continuous sense of threat, it also includes a deep sense of abandonment and incompleteness. It may be best to use a term that is as undifferentiated as that basic emotion and simply call it pain. One of the main tasks of of the mind is to fight or remove that emotional pain, which is one of the reasons for its incessant activity, but all it can ever achieve is to cover it up temporarily. In fact, the harder the mind struggles to get rid of the pain, the greater the pain. The mind can never find a solution, nor can it afford to allow you to find a solution, because it is itself an intrinsic part of a problem. Imagine a chief of the police is trying to find an arsonist when the arsonist is the chief of police itself. You'll not be free of that pain until you cease to derive your sense of self from identification with the mind, which is to say, from ego. The mind is then toppled from its place of power and being revealed itself
as your true nature. Yes, I know what you are going to ask.
I was going to ask, what about positive emotions such as love and joy? They are inseparable from your natural state of inner connectedness with being. Glimpses of love and joy or brief moments of deep peace are possible whenever a gap occurs in the stream of thought. For most people, such gaps happen rarely and only accidentally, in the moments when the mind is rendered speechless, sometimes triggered by the great beauty, extreme physical exertion, or even a great danger. Suddenly there is an inner stillness, and within that stillness there is a subtle but intense joy. There is love, there is peace. Usually such moments are short-lived, as the mind quickly resumes its noise-making activity that we call thinking. Love, joy, and peace cannot flourish until you have freed yourself from the mind dominance. But they are not what I would call emotions. They lie beyond the emotions, only on a much deeper level. So you need to become fully consciousness of your emotions and be able to feel them before you can feel that which lies beyond them. Emotion literally means disturbance. The word comes from Latin "emover", meaning to disturb. Love, joy and peace are a deep state of being, or rather three aspects of a state of inner connectedness with being. As such, they have no opposite. This is because they arise from beyond the mind. Emotions, on the other hand, being a part of dualistic mind, are subject to law of opposites. This simply means that you cannot have good without bad. So, in the unenlightened mind-identified conditions, what is sometimes wrongly called joy is usually short-lived pleasure, a side of continuously alternating pain-pleasure cycle. Pleasure is always derived from something outside you, whereas joy arises from within. The very thing that gives you pleasure today give you pain tomorrow, or it will leave you. So its absence will give you pain. And what is often rendered to love as may be pleasurable and exciting for a while, but it is an addictive clinging, an extremely needy condition that can turn into its opposite at the flick of a switch. Many love relationships after the initial euphoria has passed actually oscillates between love and hate, attraction and attack. Real love doesn't make you suffer. How could it? It doesn't suddenly turns into hate, nor does real joy turn into pain. As I said, even before you are enlightened, before you have freed from yourself, from your mind, you may get glimpses of true joy, true love, or of a deep inner peace, still but vibrantly alive. These are aspects of your true nature, which is usually obscured by the mind. Even when in a normal, addictive relationship, there can be a moment when the presence of something more genuine, sometimes something incorruptible, can be felt, but they will only be glimpses, soon to be covered up again through mind interference. It may then seem that you had something very precious and lost it, or your mind may conceive you that it was an illusion and it was all an illusion anyway. The truth is that it wasn't an illusion and you cannot lose it. It is part of your natural state which can be obscured but can never be destroyed by the mind. Even when the sky is heavily overcast, the sun hasn't disappeared. It's still there on the other side of the clouds. The Buddha says that pain or suffering arises through desire or craving, and that to be free of pain we need to cut the bonds of desire.
All craving are the mind seeking salvation or fulfillment in external things, and in the future as a substitute for joy of being. As long as I am my mind, as long as I am my mind, I am those cravings, those needs, wants, attachments, and aversions, and apart from them, there is no I except a mere possibility and unfulfilled potential, a seed that has not yet sprouted. In that case, even my desire to become free or enlightened is just another craving or fulfillment or completion in the future. So, don't seek to overcome free of desire or achieve enlightenment. Become present. Be there as the observer of the mind. Instead of quoting the Buddha, be Buddha. Be the awakened one, which is word that the Buddha means. Humans have in Humans have been in a grip of pain for eons, ever since they fell from the state of grace, entered the realm of time and mind, and lost awareness of being. At that point, they started to perceive themselves as meaningless fragments in an alien universe, unconnected to the source of to each other. Pain is inevitable as long as you are identified with your mind, which is to say, as long as you are unconsciousness, as long as you are unconscious, spiritually speaking. I'm talking here primarily of emotional pain, which is also the main cause of physical pain and physical disease. Resentment, hatred, self, self pity, guilt, anger, depression, jealousy, and so on. Even the slightest irritation, all the form of pain. And every pleasure or emotional high contains, which itself the seed of pain, its inseparable opposite, which will manifest in time. Anybody who has ever taken a drugs to get high will know that the high eventually turns into the low, that the pleasure turns into the some form of pain. Many people also know from their own experience how easily and quickly an intimate relationship can turn from a source of pleasure to source of pain. Seen from a higher perspective, both the negative and positive polarities are faces of the same coin, are both part of the underlying pain that is inseparable from the mind identified egoic state of consciousness. There are two levels to your pain: the pain that you create now and the pain from the past that still sleeps on your mind and body. Ceasing to create pain in the present and dissolving the past pain. This is what I want to talk about now.